Isabella's words fell on the Sunday lunch table with the weight of a death sentence. "Alara, I've been thinking. That bungalow of yours is deteriorating. It's a waste. I'm going to sell it to buy a vacation home in Aspen. It's what your son would have wanted." She said this as she adjusted the linen napkin on her lap, her voice as calm and controlled as her perfectly manicured nails. "She didn't ask me," she informed me, as if she were deciding to dispose of an old piece of furniture. In that instant, the hum of the ocean outside seemed to stop. I felt the weight of my 78 years, of the memories built into every wooden plank of that house, and of the grief for my son, which she used as a weapon. But beneath the pain, something new emerged. For the first time in years of silent humiliation, the sadness in my chest gave way to a cold, determined flame that ignited. She didn't know it, but at that very moment, she hadn't sealed my fate, but her own, the morning after Isabella's. Announcement was born gray, mirroring the state of my soul. I sat in my worn-out armchair on the porch, the same place where my husband Richard used to read the newspaper. The smell of salt and old wood was the perfume of my entire life, a stark contrast to the sterile, expensive fragrance that emanated from Isabella's glass and marble mansion just a few yards away. My hands, gnarled with arthritis, trembled over my teacup. Every creak of the floorboards beneath my feet seemed to whisper of the impending end. She saw me as a burden, a piece of furniture to be discarded along with the house. I was an inconvenient relic in her world of luxury and appearances, and the exhaustion I felt was so profound that I almost convinced myself she was right. It was then that I saw him. Mateo, my young gardener, was tending to my rose bushes with an almost artistic dedication. He was a Mexican immigrant, a young man in his early 20s who worked from sunrise to sunset to support his family. His silent dignity had always moved me. He treated each flower like a treasure, unlike Isabella, who saw her own immaculate garden merely as a backdrop for her parties. At that moment, the mansion door opened and Isabella emerged, flawless in her designer workout gear, her cell phone pressed to her ear. Her eyes swept over the property with an air of disdain, like a queen inspecting a territory that already bored her. It took only an instant for her gaze to find a flaw in her perfection. A single rose petal, carried by the wind from my garden, had landed on her white marble walkway. I saw her stop mid-call. "You!" she shouted at Mateo, who had his back to her, dozens of yards away. The young man turned, confused. "This is trash! Your mess is dirtying my house! You're paid to clean, not to spread your filth around! Is it so hard to do a simple job right? Or do your people only understand laziness?" The humiliation was public, cruel, and disproportionate. Mateo just lowered his head, his face flushed, and quickly went to pick up the solitary petal with his hands. He didn't say a word, but his shamed silence screamed louder than any reply. Witnessing that scene broke the inertia that pain had installed in me. The cruelty Isabella reserved for me in private, she poured out on anyone she considered inferior. That young man, with his purity and honest work, was suffering the same oppression. Protecting my home was no longer just about preserving my memories. It became an act of defending dignity against arrogance. The flame that had ignited the day before was now a bonfire. As Isabella got into her luxury car and disappeared down the street, I stood up, my hands no longer shaking. I knew exactly what I needed to do. The war would not be fought with shouts, but with pen and paper, and the first battle would begin now. My late husband, Richard, and I bought this land when the road was little more than a dirt track, and the sound of the waves was louder than any engine. We built the bungalow with our own hands. I remember the weight of the hammer, the smell of new pine under the California sun, and the feeling of happy exhaustion at the end of each day. We weren't rich. We were just two people with a simple dream. This house wasn't bought. It was born from our sweat, our effort, and above all, our love. Life flourished within those walls. Our first parties were with mismatched chairs and plates, but laughter was abundant. The kitchen doorframe still holds the pencil marks that recorded Daniel's height on each birthday, a staircase of memories climbing toward the ceiling. We survived winter storms that made the windows shake and financial crises that kept us awake at night. In every hardship, the bungalow was our safe harbor, our refuge. It was the silent witness to our entire journey, a family member made of wood and nails. Daniel grew up with salt in his hair and sand in his feet. He learned to surf on the waves that broke just a few feet from our porch, and his passion for architecture was born from observing the simple, yet solid structure his parents had erected. He dreamed of building houses that had a soul, just like ours. The bungalow was not just his home. It was his muse, the origin of his ambitions and his gentle character. He saw the value in things that money couldn't buy, a lesson that, unfortunately, he didn't have time to teach the woman he married. When Daniel introduced us to Isabella, she was a study in perfection. She brought Richard's favorite wine to dinner, remembered the name of my favorite author, and listened to our stories with an attention that bordered on devotion. She praised every corner of the bungalow, calling it authentic and full of soul. Her adoration for Daniel seemed like the kind of love every mother dreams of for her son. Looking back, I see that her performance was flawless. She wasn't falling in love with a family. She was studying a target. The first sign, so subtle I almost ignored. It came months before the wedding. I showed her a seashell mobile that Daniel and I had made when he was little. A crude piece, but full of affection. Isabella touched it with her fingertips and said with a forced smile, "How sentimental. Maybe we should put it in a box to protect it from the dust, shouldn't we?" In that protect, I heard the word hide. It was a passing suggestion, quickly covered by a compliment, but the coldness lingered in the air for an instant. On their wedding day, at a lavish reception that contrasted with our simplicity, Isabella looked from the ballroom balcony towards our bungalow in the distance. I overheard her say to a wealthy guest, "It's a property with incredible potential, a diamond in the rough waiting to be polished." She didn't say, "the home where my husband grew up," but a property. At that moment, under the party lights, I wasn't the mother of the groom. I was the resident of a future financial asset. The news of the car accident that took Daniel was a fracture in the structure of my world. My grief was a silent implosion, a black hole that swallowed all light and sound. Isabella's grief, on the other hand, was a spectacular performance. It was loud, public, and full of dramatic gestures. While I retreated into the shadows of my bungalow, she became the center of attention, the tragic young widow. With frightening efficiency, she took control of everything, from the funeral to the paperwork, treating me with a condescending pity that barely hid her haste to take over. Soon after the funeral, she announced she was moving into the investment house Richard and I owned on the hill, a larger, more modern property. "I need space to breathe, to process my grief," she said. The move was swift. Conversations about our memories were replaced by my future and the security of the estate Daniel left me. I, paralyzed by my own pain, allowed her to redraw the map of our family, placing me on a small, isolated island while she claimed the continent. The first public humiliation came at one of her parties at the new house. Introducing me to a group of her new wealthy friends, she said with an indulgent smile, "This is Alara, my late husband's mother. She lives in that rustic little bungalow down there." One of the guests tried to be kind and started asking me about my roses, but Isabella interrupted him. "Oh, darling, let's not bore him with gardening stories. The new wine cellar is much more interesting." She left me, standing there, a museum piece on display. The second was more subtle, but just as cutting. During one of her renovations, she showed me a color palette for the living room, full of cold grays and sterile beiges. "What do you think?" she asked, a semblance of inclusion. I suggested a warmer cream tone, which reminded me of the afternoon sunlight. Isabella laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. "Oh, Alara, what a lovely idea. But it's so 90s. Let's stick to the plan, shall we?" She said this in front of the decorator, demoting me from matriarch to an old woman with outdated tastes. The final humiliation before my decision came anonymously and brutally. I had made some soup, thinking of taking it to her, a gesture of peace, of family. As I approached her door, I heard her on the phone, her voice clear through the open window. "Her costs are a liability I need to manage," she was saying to a financial advisor. "We need to optimize the resources this whole situation generates." I was no longer her late husband's mother. I was a situation, a cost to be optimized. The soup grew cold in my hands. Seeing Mateo, my gardener, suffer such a similar humiliation days later was the spark that hit the powder keg. Her cruelty wasn't just for me. It was her way of operating in the world, a disease she spread on anyone she considered inferior. The silent pain I had been swallowing for years solidified into a cold, crystalline anger. Protecting my home was no longer an act of nostalgia. It was an act of war for dignity, mine and that of decent people like Mateo. That same afternoon, I went up the stairs to the attic. Each step creaked under my feet, not with the weight of my age, but with that of my resolution. The air was heavy with the smell of dust and time, filled with the memories I had so feared and now needed as a weapon. I was no longer running. I was on a mission, searching the archives of my past for the key to secure my future. My search was methodical, not desperate. I was an archivist in search of a specific document. Finally, I found Richard's metal chest. The rust on the latch gave way with a snap. Inside, I found the deed to my bungalow, but it was what was next to it that made my heart stop. It was the deed to Isabella's mansion. And stapled to it, a note in my husband's unmistakable handwriting, clear as day. "The house on the hill is a revocable family loan, not a gift. Final and irrevocable ownership belongs to Alara Vargas." In that instant, the air in the attic felt electric. The war was not lost. It had just changed course. That Friday morning, I didn't need a clock. I felt the arrival of the confrontation in the way the wind blew from the sea, a little colder, a little more insistent. I sat on the porch in my wicker armchair with a cup of chamomile tea. There was a strange peace within me. The great battles of life, I reflected, are rarely fought with the noise of cannons. Most of the time, they happen on sunny porches with the sound of the waves in the background, and are won with whispered words that carry the weight of sentences. The sound came first, the roar of a powerful and aggressive engine tearing through the tranquility of the street. It was Isabella's car, a sound I had learned to associate with her invasive presence. It was the sound of impatient wealth, which didn't ask for the right of way, but took it. Every time I heard it, I felt a small vibration of discord in the air, like a wrong note in a perfect symphony. Today, however, the sound did not intimidate me. It sounded like the herald of a necessary end. The convertible stopped abruptly in front of my gate. The California sun shone on the expensive paint, making it look like a hostile jewel. The doors opened in arrogant synchrony. First Isabella, then the man who followed her, a wolf in a well-tailored suit. They moved with the certainty of those who believe the world belongs to them. Each step on my stone walkway an affirmation of their purpose. I watched them approach, not as prey, but as a student of nature observing predators in their habitat. They didn't knock. The very idea of asking permission to enter my space was foreign to them. They stopped before me, blocking my view of the garden. Isabella wore a white dress, so sharply cut it looked like a weapon. The man beside her, the realtor, had a fixed professional smile that didn't reach his eyes, which were already scanning the property. He looked at the wooden beams, the roofline, the ocean view, and I could almost hear the figures adding up in his head. "Alara," Isabella's voice cut through the air. "This is Mr. Price. He's here to do the appraisal for a quick sale. I expect you to be cooperative and not make things difficult for all of us." The sentence was delivered with a poisonous sweetness, the same she used to isolate me at parties or to diminish my opinions. It was the voice of tyranny disguised as reason. Every word was a reminder of why I was sitting there, waiting for that exact moment. Mr. Price offered me an almost imperceptible nod, his attention already captured by what he saw as merchandise. His eyes passed over me as if I were part of the furniture. a temporary obstacle to his work. He was mentally demolishing my home, tearing down the walls filled with memories of Daniel, calculating the value of a piece of land where my husband's laughter still echoed. In that gaze, I saw the desecration of all that was sacred. To me. In response to all that silent aggression, I made the simplest gesture. I raised my teacup to my lips. The slight clink of porcelain against the saucer was the only sound for an instant. A small act of civility amidst a barbaric invasion. It was a reminder, perhaps more to myself, that I belonged to that place, to that calm. That sip of tea was my first line of defense, an invisible wall against their vulgarity. "I'm afraid you gentlemen have wasted your trip," I said finally. My voice came out surprisingly clear and firm, without the tremor I had feared. The words hung in the air, so out of place in their tranquility that, for a second, neither Isabella nor the realtor seemed to process them. They looked at each other, a spark of confusion on their previously confident faces. Isabella was the first to recover. She let out a short laugh, a sharp and dismissive sound. "Don't be ridiculous, Alara. Your little senility games won't work today. Mr. Price has a busy schedule." Her reaction was not one of anger, but of pure disdain. The possibility that I could have any real power was so absurd to her that her first response was to treat my statement as a symptom of dementia. "It's not a game, Isabella," I replied, keeping my gaze fixed on hers. "It's a fact. The house is no longer for sale." I paused before delivering the blow. "Because I sold it yesterday morning." The word "sold" left my mouth and hit the air with the force of a stone. It was the first seismic tremor in Isabella's perfectly controlled world. The disbelief on her face turned to fury. The color rose up her neck, staining her pale skin. "You what? You can't do that. Are you insane?" "Completely insane." Her voice, once controlled, was now shrill. She took a step forward, her body tense with rage. "This house is part of the family estate. You have no authority." "On the contrary," I said, and the calm in my voice seemed to infuriate her even more. "I have all the authority. The house was always, and has always been, solely in my name. It was Richard's first wedding gift to me, long before you existed. I didn't need your permission." This simple legal truth was a bucket of cold water on her fury. The anger was still there, but now mixed with a hint of uncertainty. She recovered by reaching for her most reliable arsenal: intimidation. "I'm calling my lawyers right now," she hissed. "They will nullify any deal a senile old woman like you has made. They will prove you are legally incompetent to make decisions. They will destroy you." The threat hung between us, the promise of an ugly and humiliating legal war. It was at that moment that Mr. Price made his decision. He wasn't a family lawyer, he was a salesman. The smell of a bitter legal dispute and local headlines was poison for business. With a murmur about having another appointment, he backed away, turned, and walked briskly to his car, abandoning his client on the battlefield. Seeing her ally flee was the first visible sign that her power was disintegrating. I watched the realtor leave, and then turned my gaze back to Isabella, who seemed momentarily lost without her accomplice. I used her own threat as a bridge to my next move. "Since we're talking about lawyers and legal decisions," I began, taking full control of the conversation, "perhaps it's a good time to clarify another property." Her eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" I allowed myself a long pause, letting the tension build until it was almost unbearable. Then, I said the words. "The house on the hill. The mansion you live in. It was also sold this morning." If the first news was a tremor, this was a cataclysm. She staggered backward as if she had been physically struck. No, impossible. You can't. That house is mine," she screamed, her voice breaking in a mixture of panic and fury. "It's my husband's legacy. It's in his name." This was the core of the lie on which she had built her life, and it was time to demolish it. "No, Isabella, it was never in his name, and it was certainly never in yours," I said, each word carefully placed. "Richard bought it as an investment, and he put it in my name. It was a family loan, dear, a place for you and my son to live. I leaned forward, my voice now a whisper that carried more weight than all her shouts. And your greed, your cruelty, and your attempt to take my home from me have just revoked the terms of that loan. I leaned back, the final verdict delivered, the silence. That followed was absolute. All the fire went out of Isabella. Her fury, her arrogance, her queenly posture. It all crumbled in an instant. She stood there, a statue of shock, her face a pale mask of horror and comprehension. Her eyes, once so piercing and calculating, were now empty, lost. She was a dethroned queen, stripped of her kingdom and her armor in a single conversation. I looked at the broken woman before me and felt no triumph. I felt only a deep sadness and the overwhelming relief of the end. The end of the abuse, the end of the fear, the end of the pain. She was just an empty shell, filled with nothing but a greed that had consumed her whole. The next morning, her world would finish crumbling publicly, and mine, in silence and with dignity, would finally begin again. Are you enjoying this story? Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Now let's continue with the video. The next morning, a different kind of silence woke me. It wasn't the heavy silence of loneliness to which I had grown accustomed, but a light, clean silence. It was the absence of an oppressive presence, a quietness that filled the spaces where there was once tension. For the first time in years, my first thought upon waking was not one of apprehension, but of a curious calm about what the day would bring. The air coming through the bedroom window did, in fact, seem easier to breathe. I went to the window and looked at the mansion on the hill. In the morning light, it looked like a hollow shell, a movie set abandoned after the final scene. The perfectly manicured lawn already seemed a little less arrogant, the dark windows like empty eyes. I thought about how a place that had been the stage for so much hubris and noise could become so insignificant overnight. Isabella's wealth was a performance, and without the audience and the power, the stage was simply empty. The phone rang around 10 in the morning. The name of a notoriously gossipy neighbor flashed on the screen. I watched. The device vibrate on the table, a summons to the circus of rumors that was surely already in full swing. I let it ring until the silence returned. It was a conscious decision. My story would not be told in malicious whispers over well-tended fences. My newfound peace was a private garden, and I would not allow weeds to invade it. I knew what they would be saying. To some, I would be the cruel old woman who robbed the poor widow. To others, the victim who finally got her revenge. The truth, as always, was quieter and more complex. I discovered, to my surprise, that their opinion didn't matter to me one bit. For years, I had lived under the weight of what others thought. Now, my only audience was my own conscience and the honored memory of my husband and son. In my last days at the bungalow, I spent hours in my garden. I touched the velvety petals of the roses that Isabella so despised, smelled the damp earth, watched the bees working tirelessly. Every flower, every leaf, was a small miracle of resilience. That garden taught me the most important lesson. Even after the harshest winter, life finds a way to bloom again. It was a sensory farewell, a way of thanking the land that had given me so much comfort. When it was time to pack, I was selective. I ignored the valuable objects and focused on what had emotional weight. In a small wooden box, I placed the last photo we took of the three of us together. Richard's reading glasses, with the marks of his fingers. The first shell Daniel found on the beach, small and imperfect. I wasn't packing things. I was curating my past, choosing the few sacred relics that would form the foundation of my future. On moving day, after the movers had taken the last box, I went back inside the empty house. The echo of my footsteps on the wooden floor was the only sound. I went to the fireplace and placed a single red rosebud there, picked that morning. It was not a gesture of sadness or farewell, but of continuity. It was a welcome gift. For the new family, a silent wish that they would find the same happiness there that I once knew. The first time I entered my new apartment, it was empty and smelled of fresh paint. The huge windows overlooked the bustling city streets, a landscape of energy and movement. There was no sound of the sea, but there was the sound of life. I looked at the white walls and didn't see a smaller space, a reduction. I saw a blank canvas, an opportunity to paint a new work, with colors I would choose. Myself. The ritual of unpacking was slow and deliberate. The first thing I put in its new place was the photograph of Richard and Daniel on the small table next to my favorite armchair. Next, I arranged my beloved books on the shelves. Each object found its place, and with each one I positioned, the apartment ceased to be a property and became, little by little, my home. The soul of a house, I realized, is not in its size, but in the stories it holds. The meeting with my lawyer, Arthur, the following week, was the true beginning of my second act. His office, with its leather-bound books and dark wood furniture, was a sanctuary of dignity. When I outlined my plan for the foundation, his wrinkled eyes shone. "Alara," he said, his voice filled with a contained emotion. "Richard would be immensely proud. Not of the money, but of you, of the woman you have become." We spent hours defining the mission of the Vargas Legacy Fund. I insisted that the criteria go beyond grades and numbers. We would look for spark, resilience, kindness. The scholarships would not just be financial aid, but mentorship programs. The microloans for small businesses would come with consulting. We didn't just want to give money, we wanted to invest in people. We wanted to cultivate the dignity that Isabella's greed tried to eradicate. The act of signing the papers that legally created the foundation was a moment of silent power. My hand, which had trembled for so long with stress and arthritis, was perfectly steady. The pen moved with a clear purpose. Each letter of my name seemed to seal not a legal document, but a pact with myself. A pact to turn the greatest pain of my life into its greatest purpose. Days later, I made the phone call. "Mateo? It's Alara Vargas." There was a surprised pause on the other end. "Mrs. Vargas? Did something happen?" His voice was full of genuine concern. "No, my dear. On the contrary. I'd like to invite you to lunch. There's something I want to propose to you." The hesitation in his reply revealed a man accustomed to expecting the worst. I insisted gently, and he accepted. At the restaurant, a simple and pleasant place, he barely touched his food, his eyes lowered, full of respect and nervousness. I told him about the foundation, about its purpose of giving a first chance to those who deserve it. Then, I made the offer. The first business loan for Dignity Landscaping, and the first scholarship for community college. He looked up, and I saw his eyes were filled with tears. He couldn't speak for a long moment. Then, with a choked voice, he said the phrase that would become the unofficial motto of our foundation. "No one has ever believed in me like this before." In that instant, all the suffering of the past years seemed worth it, because it led me to that moment of pure and transformative human connection. News of Isabella was fragmented, like distant echoes from a shipwreck. An old neighbor mentioned seeing a photo of her on social media, working behind the counter of a cosmetics store somewhere in the Midwest. She was without makeup, her hair tied back carelessly, a tired expression on her face. I felt no joy, no pity. I felt only the cold logic of the universe. The consequence of her actions was not a divine punishment, but a simple equation. Her identity was built on pillars of money, status, and the envious admiration of others. When those pillars were removed, nothing was left. Her fall was not an event, it was a revelation. The revelation that, underneath all the appearance, she had always been empty. My daily life, in contrast, became rich in small joys. I started volunteering at the neighborhood library. Helping a child find a book that ignited their imagination brought me more happiness than any ocean view. I made friends with other volunteers, women with fascinating life stories, with whom I would have coffee and talk about books, grandchildren, and the world, never about the price of real estate. Once a month, I presided over the board meeting of our small foundation. Sitting at the head of a modest table, I read the stories of young people full of dreams, of immigrants fighting for a better life, of single mothers wanting to start a business from home. Looking at their faces in the photos on the forms, I saw my new garden. Each scholarship granted, each loan approved, was a seed of hope that I had the honor of planting. From my apartment window, at night, I see a sea of lights. Each light is a house, a family, a story. I no longer have the vastness of the ocean to myself, but I feel connected to an ocean of humanity. I have discovered that true legacy is not what you keep for yourself, but what you sow in others. True wealth is not having much, but being enough to make a difference. And that is a fortune that no one, ever again, can take from me. Have you ever done an act of kindness that changed someone's life? Leave a heart in the comments if you also believe that love is worth more than any wealth. Subscribe to the channel for more stories of second chances. Comment, "Love has no price," if you also believe in human kindness. 3 whole years have passed. Time, which once dragged on in a succession of gray days, now flies, filled with a purpose that rejuvenates my soul. Today, the sun shines brightly on the La Esperanza neighborhood, and the air doesn't smell of salt and melancholy, but of freshly cut grass, fresh paint, and popcorn from a street vendor who smiles at the children. I am at the inauguration of the Vargas Community Center, and the dominant sound is not that of lonely waves, but a symphony of life, music, lively conversations, and above all, the crystal-clear laughter of dozens of children. I look at my reflection in the glass of the entrance door and see an 81-year-old woman. The wrinkles are deeper, the hair completely white, but there is a light in my eyes that sadness had extinguished for a long time. My back, once bent by the weight of loss and humiliation, is straighter today. It is not a miracle of medicine, but of the soul. Releasing the burden of the past, I discovered, is the best remedy for posture. The woman staring back at me no longer seems fragile. She seems finally at peace. The center itself is not a work of extravagant architecture, like Isabella's mansion. On the contrary, its beauty lies in its simplicity and function. It is a one-story building, made of warm bricks and light wood, with large windows that invite the light in. There is a small library, rooms for vocational courses, a community kitchen, and a hall where people gather. At the entrance, a discreet bronze plaque reads, "Vargas Community Center, in loving memory of Richard and Daniel Vargas. A place to grow." I see Mateo crossing the lawn towards me. The change in him is remarkable. The shy, hunched-shouldered young man has given way to a confident and smiling 30-year-old businessman. He greets people by name, shakes hands, resolves a small problem with the sound system with a quiet authority. The hands that were once humiliated for a rose petal now command a thriving landscaping company that employs 12 other people from the community. He hands me a glass of iced lemonade and stands beside me, following my gaze to the playground. "Remember that morning, Alara? The one with the rose petal?" he asks in a low voice, a smile on his lips. I smile back. I remember it perfectly. I think it was the most expensive petal in California history. It cost a mansion and financed all of this. We both laugh, a light, shared laugh that acknowledges the pain of the past, but celebrates it as the fertile ground from which all this has grown. His gaze turns to a little girl coming down the slide. "That's Sophia's daughter," he says. "Sophia started her catering service with one of our first microloans. She's the one taking care of all the food today. The business is taking off." I look at the snack stall, where a smiling woman is serving people with pride. Her happiness is palpable. This isn't an annual report from a foundation. This is real life, changing right in front of me. "You should be so proud, Alara. Look at what you've built," Mateo says, his voice full of an admiration that still moves me. I shake my head gently and place my hand on his. "No, my friend. Not what I built. What we built. This was built by the memory of my husband, by the love of my son, by your resilience, and by the hard work of dozens of people like Sophia. The spark may have been mine, but the fire belongs to the whole community." At that moment, a little girl with pigtails, Sophia's daughter, runs up to me. She holds out her little hand, in which she holds a slightly crushed dandelion. "For you, ma'am," she says with an adorable shyness. I bend down to accept the small flower as if it were the rarest diamond in the world. It's the most beautiful gift I've received today. Thank you, sweetheart. She smiles and runs back to the swing. In this simple gesture, I feel the purest recognition. I am no longer the lonely old lady from the bungalow. I am the ma'am of the center, an honorary grandmother to this community. My gaze gets lost in the scene. I think of the two houses that dominated my life. The bungalow, a fortress of memories that, without my realizing it, kept me chained to the past. The mansion, a luxury prison that represented a future of fear and servitude. Both were anchors. What I didn't understand was that to navigate, a boat needs to free itself from all anchors. Only then can it find new shores. Today, I own nothing but a comfortable apartment and the memories I chose to keep. Yet, I have never felt so rich. My true property is in the laughter of these children, in Mateo's success, in Sophia's dignity. It is in the spirit of this place. It took me 81 years to understand that a home is not a place you own, but a place where you are needed. And here, on this piece of ground vibrant with hope, I am finally home.